Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Not Just Politics podcast. We are still in the windy city of Chicago for the Bridge USA convention. Today's guest is a returning guest, the bridging and bias specialist for AllSides Technologies, former president of the Bridge USA chapter at Capital University, and then I was gonna say freshly graduated, but that's that former president. You've now graduated. Clare Ashcraft welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
I botched that. How have you been? We haven't seen you in a while. Well, I guess since the AllSides episode that we did, but that was with other people.
The podcast hasn't seen me in a while. I saw you just last month, but
I know.
it's good to be back. Good to see you again. Good to be back on the podcast again. Good to speak to the Paul brothers and the other listeners.
Yes, I forgot about the fact that they listen to the show. The Paul brothers do listen. Isn't it strange to think about the fact that we talk to each other basically every single day, and this is only our 5th time ever meeting each other in person?
Is it only our 5th?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, there's got to be more because there are 2 summits, 2 Braver Angels conventions, and I came to Pittsburgh for the music festival.
That's fine.
Wait. Okay, yeah, that is fine. You're right. Okay, 5th. I can't do math. But yeah, that is kind of crazy. That is kind of crazy.
Think about that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow. What's been going on? What have you been up to?
Not much. I mean, I graduated and now I just feel like work, reading, trying to figure out what I want to do with my time other than work. I like cooking, and so like I cook and I read and all that, but trying to find some other things to do that actually involve people. So I actually leave my bedroom, you know.
Because otherwise you will work yourself to death.
People think I'm a workaholic, and I do love my work, but I don't work insane hours. I just also don't go see people, and I'm passionate about my work, so I end up talking about my work a lot, and that's fine. That's fine. It's my whole brand. But
not to dive into the heavy stuff right away, but I'm going to dive into the heavy stuff right away.
Okay.
As you know, because you work at AllSides, and I was talking to you during this time, you were incredibly busy and taking care of stuff. But what did you have any thoughts about the assassination attempt on Trump's life that you didn't see kind of floating around in mainstream media and other places? This was something that, AllSides covered pretty heavily. Everyone seemingly disappeared from whatever they were doing the previous week, and everyone seemed to be focused on that.
Yeah. I mean, you helped me. I pulled close to an all-nighter trying to collect content as it was coming out about the assassination attempt because we didn't really know what was going on at the time yet, and everyone was reporting things slightly differently. One of the things we noticed was the right was a lot quicker to call it a shooting. They were just taking videos off X and saying, it looks like a shooting, he was shot. Whereas the left, for several hours, were not reporting it as a shooting. They were saying loud noises were heard, Trump's ear appears to be injured, he was whisked off stage. They didn't report that it was a shooting till much later. I don't know if they were waiting on some sort of confirmation from local law enforcement. That's what it seems like. Although a lot of them had reporters actually there on the ground at the rally. And someone on our staff was arguing, if you have people there that witnessed it, then you need to report it's a shooting, not wait on local law enforcement. It would actually be irresponsible to do that, is what she was arguing, because you had people there. So it's definitely interesting to see the difference in how things were reported. Something else that was interesting is there were 2 news outlets, I want to say it was Breitbart and AP, that reported at one point that they didn't know it was a bullet that hit Trump's ear, and they thought it might have been shrapnel from the teleprompter. Mm-hmm. And that story just kind of went away. Nothing happened with it, and they just kind of switched to, it looks like a gunshot. And then in the latest FBI testimony, the FBI director said, we actually don't know if it was a gunshot. It could have been shrapnel. However, Trump and his doctor said it was a gunshot wound. So it appears to be confirmed that it's a gunshot wound, but now the FBI director is saying, well, they don't know for sure. And originally, 2 reports said that it could have been shrapnel, but then it just kind of went away. So that was something that was interesting that I observed. I mean, a lot right after the news was just trying to figure out what was going on. And there were a lot of course, on social media, a lot of conspiracy theories, especially on the left right away, saying that it was staged, which, of course, is interesting rhetoric from people who said about Sandy Hook, it's outrageous to say it was staged. You can't say that. It's, a terrible thing. And they often, a talking point on the left is the right is conspiracy theorists, right? And then the left in this case immediately jumped to a sense of conspiracy, which was interesting. You don't see that a lot from them anymore, I feel like. There was, I think, less conspiracy on the right because they're more likely to valorize Trump and say, look, he's a hero. But something I didn't really see reflected in social media at all was, like, my conservative dad was like, oh, yeah, it is a conspiracy setup, but it was by the DNC rather than by Trump. And I didn't see that a lot of places, but I know there are people on both sides who think that it's staged and people on both sides that think that it was real. I know my managing editor was giving the opinion that he was like, unless there's evidence that it was staged, he was like, I don't understand how or why they would have done that, or like why these people are making this argument for sure. And then other people on the team were like, well, the argument would be in part that it was public. And so if you say, oh, Trump died in his office because maybe his food was poisoned, or you just say Trump died in his office, people would be very suspicious about that. But if you took a shot at him and were successful in front of hundreds of witnesses, then there aren't really questions about that. You have a fall guy, you have someone who's shot in public. It feels more like cemented. Everyone saw it happen. There are no more questions to be asked, kind of case closed. Versus if something were to happen in private, there would be a lot of conspiracy theories. And in public, there were a lot of conspiracy theories. But potentially the philosophy behind doing something like that might have been that there will be less questions if it's public. But yeah, I don't know. I tend to try not to go into conspiracy unless I have a particular reason to. And the more I looked at it, the more I was like, it's hard to believe that the Secret Service was so incompetent. And so I can understand both sides of people saying, oh, they're completely incompetent and you have no evidence to say it was staged. And people saying, oh my God, I just cannot believe that something like this would have happened. Therefore, it must have been staged because there were so many loopholes. And they just can't wrap their head around that amount of loopholes. And so I kind of understand both sides, but like I'm never going to publicly suggest that a violent act was staged unless I have a really good reason to. But those are some of the things I was seeing.
What do you think the process looks like for a young man like that to get so radicalized that he would decide to do something like this?
Yeah, I heard some people calling him a radical centrist, which is different from the usual insult of squishy centrist, because they were saying...
Finally, we're getting a different... Not that it's good, but finally something different.
I was like, you can call him a lot of things, but mushy's not one of them.
This is a good point.
They were saying that it seemed like he might have just hated both sides, but if you're on the left, it's easy to make the argument he was on the right. His classmates are saying that he was a fierce defender of conservative values. But if you're on the right, it's easy to say, oh, he donated, I think it was like less than $20 to this Democratic super PAC, this progressive super PAC when he was like 16. And so either way, you could kind of make the case that he was conservative or he was progressive, but like, and a lot of people, and the truth to me seems more towards the fact that, like a lot of us, he hated both options. He felt like the system was against him and not giving him a voice. Is what I imagine. And it's definitely interesting because a lot of the shootings that happen, people argue, oh, it's this nihilistic like radicalization towards the right usually. They're the ones that use guns more often, and especially with like hate-based crimes, people think they're radicalized to the right. So it was interesting to see someone who's maybe radicalized to the center. I don't know. No one can really be inside his head and know what happened, but I think a lot of us can in some way imagine why someone would feel like the system's never going to get better and that it's against us. Especially, I also think the fact that he's 20 and we're 21, and I think about, the born around 9/11. Then we really didn't know anything about politics until Trump Hillary, which was when like we were around 12, 11, 13. And then we had COVID when we were graduating high school, and we couldn't see each other for like 3 years at this major time in our lives. Like, people miss proms and graduations. Like, we don't have a great sampling of democracy. And I think being in Bridge, we know how to see the light, but it's hard to remember that there was like a light before this in politics that was ever good, because you hear about it, but like we never got that. We've only had Trump. And so I think that makes it all the easier, especially if you're entranced in a lot of the rhetoric, this like 15% of social media users that are producing all this angry, engaging content. If that's what you're listening to and you don't have any experience to the contrary because you're so young, I think in some ways I can kind of see how someone would feel like this is never going to change, because, I mean, why would it? Like, then in the next 4 years, we're going to have someone that most people don't like. Now we have Kamala. She's a fresh face. So maybe things will change. But at the time of the Trump assassination attempt, it was still Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. And we were like, it's 4 more years of the last 4 years. It makes it look even darker,
Yeah. Do you think that when we have our conversations about these young men that get radicalized, because this kid checked all the boxes. He had been looking up events for both speakers. He had spent a lot of time online. I almost said donated to an OnlyFans creator. Isn't that a funny way of saying it? He had paid, I think it was like close to $1,500 to this one OnlyFans creator. So he was radicalized in that sense too. So it kind of checks all the boxes. And I get frustrated whenever I hear all of this talk about the alt-right pipeline. The alt-right pipeline. It's first it's Jordan Peterson, and then it's Andrew Tate, and then it's literal killing people in the street, apparently. Like, I feel like that's how the progression seems whenever you hear it. Do you think that bringing politics into that conversation is muddying the water a little bit?
I mean, maybe. It was interesting to see. I didn't hear much about the alt-right pipeline in this case, and there were outlets on the left, particularly New York Times and Slate, that had articles that were focusing on the nihilism of young men. And it wasn't specifically like these creators. It was just saying loners, people that are bullied, like you were saying, checking all the boxes. And a lot of them also said, in combination with them having easy access to guns, is what makes this a problem, that it's like a mental health thing. But I guess I was a little uncomfortable with those articles, not because it's not a problem, but the way it came off to me was a little bit like this is a male problem. And certainly men tend to have more outward displays of violence, tend to be more likely to go towards guns, while women are more likely to do, internal violence, that kind of thing. It is like a gendered thing, but I guess it felt a little victim blamey of like, men do this to themselves. And why do teenage men act like this? And I'm like, this is something as a society that we need to heal. We shouldn't be like exploring the nihilism of young men to be like, oh, like with a sense of morbid curiosity. It should be with an orientation, I think, towards solutions and how can we all help, not like, oh, these young men are going down a bad path and they just need to do better, like as if it's their fault. I'm like, we have to acknowledge we live in the context of the past and all that came before us, and that we've created a society that also pushes young men towards this. Like, yes, there's always an element of personal responsibility, and the actions of the shooter were his own 100%. But also, when there's a trend of this, we need to not just put it all on the individual and see what systems do we have in place that are pushing men this way. And I think also look at the bad with the good. And in that context, like, yeah, men are more likely to pick up guns and cause a lot of damage, but also men are usually the ones who are firefighters running into burning buildings, who are soldiers. And so I think you have to take that all together. Like, yes, they can be more volatile, but also have more bravery when it's necessary. And so it's like, it's an important balance, I think, that we have with both genders have different strengths. And we need to be like, how can we lean into those strengths and mitigate the destruction? Again, as a society, not saying, oh, this is men's problem to solve, they're being so nihilistic. It's like, how have we created a society where we've allowed this to flourish?
Yeah, I really like why you called it a morbid curiosity, because that's what I get so frustrated by, is it seems like we've almost fetishized this a little bit, not even from the perspective of the young men, but we've fetishized our societal conversation around it. It's like, it's almost like you get the brownie points for bringing up the same 5 talking points over and over and over again. And it doesn't seem like we ever get to actually talking about how to help these young men, other than to, and I might, people might not like me saying this, but it seems like one of the main solutions is like make them more like women.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's also not going to work, because there are differences there that you can't ignore. I'm going to get in trouble for saying that. I don't care.
No, I agree. I think that's why it's like you need everyone involved as a society to say, how can we help these people? Because naturally, people are going to come up with the solutions that they think are best, that work for them in their experience. But we need to listen to, for example, there's like a man who is open about he almost became a school shooter. And I'm like, you need to listen to someone like that who's been through it, as well as people who haven't been through it. They have good ideas as well. But if you just have like women in power being like, how do we help these men? Then it's like, well, you need men involved, you need women involved, you need lower income, you need higher income, you need all of the people to kind of help heal this and make it work. But yeah, I agree with you.
And, you know, there was one thing Monica Guzman said when she was talking to Manu that I really liked, where it was the argument for bridge building, which was like, why would to a certain extent, like, why would minorities get themselves involved in this situation where they could potentially be harmed by dangerous ideas? And Monica said, well, if you want the culture to evolve, you have to jump in. Like, if you want to change it, you have to make your experiences heard. So why aren't we going directly to these young men? Like, why aren't we talking to them, trying to ask them, like, because I don't know. I don't think, I guess that's my question. Do they like being like that? Do they like living that super nihilistic life where they end up feeling like they have to resort to violence to make themselves feel more empowered?
Yeah. I don't think anyone does like that life, but I don't think the vast majority of people do, maybe a psychopath. But I think a lot of this stems from them not being listened to. People don't know who to listen to, because the point is they've been forced into the background and bullied a lot of times and feel invisible, and they want to make themselves visible. And so, like, we would love to have those conversations, but we don't know who those people are because we don't see them, right? So that's what makes it tricky.
And then I guess another potential problem is when you go to some of those online places, like some of the deep corners of Reddit, 4chan, even I imagine some of Discord, maybe there's some stuff like that. It could be tough to tell if you're dealing with bots or not. So it's like, am I even talking to a real person?
Right.
That could make it tough.
And then we have that like 10% of people posting 80% of content on social media. And so it's like, if you're engaging with one of those 10% people, it's like, is it even worth it? Because they're so flooded with other content. And like you said, you don't even know whether you're talking to a bot or a real person. It feels like going online, dealing with so much high conflict, that's like not the place to engage. But these people, like, sometimes you can't get them in person because they're quiet. You don't know that they're there. They're in their room in their mom's basement. So it's like, you can't reach them except through the internet because that's where they are. But you can't even find where they are on the internet a lot of times because it's so vast. And on the odd occasion you don't know that they're worth engaging with because you don't know that there's a person behind the screen or not.
I would like to speak to someone like that. But you're right, it is going to be tough to find that person. Going back to the assassination attempt, you wrote on your Substack, which will be linked in the description of this video, that we had a close brush with death as a nation with that, and that you would hope that it would make people realize that even if they didn't like Trump, that he's a father and that he's a husband and that he's a human being. And it seems like we had our little 2 weeks in the sun with Unity, and that was something I think we immediately talked about. That we were like, I hate to sound like a pessimist, but it's not going to last very long.
Mm-hmm.
How else do you think we can? How else do you think we can? I guess this is kind of like what Tim Urban writes about, and what's our problem is like we have to find a way to get wiser without taking a fall, because a fall does so much damage at this point. How do we? What's it going to take at this point? Like, truly, what's it going to take? Like, do you have any thoughts on this? Like, what do we have to do? Because obviously the bridge building is going to be the obvious answer, but that's going to take time. It's going to take a minute, I imagine.
Yeah. It's the eternal question because, like you said, we all claim to want change, but when we want change, we have to shuffle things around, get rid of some things, and sometimes that involves consequences that involve people actually dying or losing their livelihoods. And so it's hard to deal with because any solution you come up with has unintended consequences, and those consequences affect real people. But you also have to accept failure if you want to build something better. And also look at the hard fact that failure means that someone gets evicted from their house, and that's a real person. And so it's very hard on a nationwide scale to accept anything different than status quo. Not that where we're at is particularly status quo, but it's quickly becoming it. I mean, we've had 8 years of this, more than that. So it's difficult. I don't know what it's going to take to change, but I think people want something different. People have made that very clear in polling that no one really wants to be where we're at right now. Election-wise, I think a lot of people in this country said we're headed in the wrong direction. There was a big poll about that recently. Yeah, no one's feeling good. And I think everyone wants change, but the question is how and what do we do? And I don't have the answer other than like start talking to each other. But again, how do you even do that on the nationwide scale? Like we're bridgers, but you can only bridge with 10 people in a conversation.
Yeah.
Like, how do we do that? How do we scale that? And
I think more people have to get. I mean, I have always said that I would never force someone or like make someone do this, but I truly do think that if we want to scale it, more people have to buy into the idea.
Yeah. I don't know what the answer is. I know what I'm trying to do, which is trying to deliver people information from all perspectives, because that's scalable. To take the information ecosystem and try and package it in a way where I can give people the other side and hopefully kind of calm down the temperatures and try and help them get to the truth and just, decide for themselves what the truth is, but see all the sides. And I feel like that's really as big of a kind of bite out of the problem that I can take on right now, because I don't know the answers. No, I don't think any one person has the answers. I think it's going to take all of us getting together. How do all of us get together? Who knows? Again, that's not like a problem for me as an individual to solve, but someone has to try and solve it, because otherwise it's never going to happen. And so, like, I don't know what the hell we do. I'm 21, but I'm just a girl trying to save democracy in Ohio. What do you expect me to do? I don't know. But I think trying and being willing to try and dedicate time and supporting movements like bridging where I can and things like electoral reform. And I think somehow we have to try and get everyone back to that place of like civic responsibility and being like, I'm going to do what I can, of no one person taking on this big issue, but somehow marketing to each individual that like you really do have power if all of us take care of our communities and try and do this together. I think it's going to take a narrative shift about being one nation and us all caring for that. Like I think of the Braver Angels convention when we were all singing America's Beautiful in this chapel, and it didn't matter that you considered yourself particularly patriotic, but like we all were a part of something. And I think we need somehow to bring back that narrative of we're all a part of making this country better. and all of us has a responsibility to do what we can for our neighbors, for our citizens, for people in California. If you're in rural Iowa, wherever you are, you have an obligation to the other people of this nation, and really ingraining that into people in a way that's not partisan. Like, obviously, I'm not saying, we should make elementary schoolers pledge allegiance to the flag and do all these things that might be considered Republican, in the same way that we shouldn't only teach children about the bad parts of this nation and the mistakes. I mean, again, it's hard because you try and give a unifying narrative and people turn it into partisan and say, like, you can't be patriotic or you can't have the American flag because that's become a partisan symbol itself. So it's difficult, but we have to somehow instill, I think, civic responsibility as much as we can, and taking care of each other, and that's all we can do.
Mm-hmm. And going back to the thing with the Trump assassination, another question about that too is, like you were saying, like, people want change, but they're not, it's like, what are you willing to give up for change?
Yeah.
What are you willing to give up? Like, you have to give up something. You have to give up your certainty. You have to give up maybe you have to give up your ideology. Maybe you don't. But, like, I guess that's a question that everybody has to ask themselves, because that's going to be a different answer for everybody.
Yeah, it's definitely uncomfortable to give up your certainty and the things that have gotten you so far, but you also have to look at where you want to be and say, is the thing that got me from A to B going to get me to point C where we need to be? And if it's not, you have to get new experiences to kind of shed those old habits and beliefs, and that's extremely difficult to ask of anybody, but there's not really an alternative either.
No, and nothing about this was supposed to be easy.
No.
We've talked about that a lot recently.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy. Like, everyone is just taking the easy way out, thinking that it's going to actually bring about change. I don't think it will. And then quickly just jumping back to... that was something that John Gable, when I talked to John Gable the first time, something he had questioned was, like, Bridge USA and Braver Angels are, I think, vitally necessary at this point, but it is tough to scale them in a way that AllSides is much easier to scale. So is there a goal? Does AllSides have a goal, like milestones of, like, scaling up, I guess?
I mean,
if that's even, like, a question that makes any sense.
I mean, it does. There are obviously milestones as far as just impressions. How many new people are we reaching all of the time with our news, with our media bias, and then also people that are consistently using us. We have an AllSides for Schools program, and our teachers using us to teach. That's, a sign of scalability if it's getting into kind of the next generation. So there's that as well. Like, we're used in all 50 states by teachers and librarians. And then, there's milestones. We've had a huge traffic bump from the Trump assassination, Joe Biden dropping out. It's obviously not the way we wanted to do it, but big news, seeing people come to us, even as well, just some more individual anecdotes we get of people saying either, I just found you, you're so beneficial, but not just compliments, also people saying, why aren't you covering this? Like, someone asked, why aren't you covering the coup in Myanmar? And we were like, that means they're coming to us for information first. So that means something, that they're not going to whatever other source of information that's in their echo chamber. They're coming to us and saying, hey, I trust you, and I get all my first news from you, and so I want to know why aren't you talking about this thing that I care about? And I'm like, that's awesome. Like, if you're coming to us first. So, I mean, yeah, like, things like follower accounts obviously is not our main driver. It's not a priority. It doesn't affect how we do things in the newsroom. But at the same time, we have to track that kind of stuff to make sure what we're doing is resonating with people and getting out there. I mean, there are random things like Google will do updates and it will crash our traffic, and we don't know what Google did. We don't know if we're doing anything wrong. We don't get any sort of feedback. And so there are random things like that where it's like, they're numbers things and we're getting out to less people, but there's nothing that we did. And so there are things like that we have to keep track of the numbers and try and navigate without straying from our content and our mission. Like, our mission is first priority, but, we're also trying to be like, how do we scale in the most efficient way? And how do we move forward as a small startup company without much money, but with, a lot of people saying they want and need us. Like we get compliments and feedback all the time. And like things like, why aren't you covering the story I care about? It's like, because we don't have a big team and we're trying our best and we're human beings. Although, we love to take suggestions of what we should cover, but, it's things like that where it's just business decisions of like, we're actually making a lot of impressions. We have a lot of followers for such a small company, but it's never enough, We've got to somehow make money to prove this is a viable business model, that you can be a bridger rather than a polarizer like Fox News or MSNBC, and you can make money while doing it, because otherwise they're not going to change. That's a kind of problem I have with the bridging space, is a lot of them are nonprofits, and they're lovely, and I love my nonprofits, but they complain about how the media is a part of the problem, and I'm like, well, then you have to show them how to do better. You can't just say, hey, Fox News, MSNBC, change out of the goodness of your heart because it's better for the country. They have bottom lines. We all do. And so we have to prove in a way that you can make money doing this work and being not polarizing and doing things that are healthy for the country. Because if we prove you can make money doing that, then suddenly it might be viable to make big scale change. That's like part of the big point of scaling.
Do you think that conflict entrepreneurs at this point are operating more off of malice or fear?
I think for a lot of them, it's genuine fear. I guess I don't attribute to malice anything that could just be, stupidity, ignorance, fear. I think those are major emotions we run off of, more than hatred. Of course, there is hatred out there, but when I look at a lot of the people that I view as extremely divisive, I at one point or another in my life might have agreed with what they were saying, because I felt that same fear or ignorance for the most part. Like, it's, unless you're actively seeking the best arguments from each side all the time, it's so easy to just see, a bad take from the other side and feel like they're trying to come for your way of life, and that, how could they possibly think that about people like me? Of course, because you're not talking to them and they're not talking to you. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would like to believe that a lot of it is a fear because we're not talking to each other, and just an unawareness of where the other side is coming from, and not genuine hatred for the other side, because I don't think I've seen that. I don't think I've seen genuine hatred from the other side, and maybe, I'm sure there are in communities I'm not in, I'm sure there is actual hatred. But I think a lot about our human evolutionary instincts, and it's to have community. And sometimes someone's had a really hard life, and the only people that's offering them community is a hate group, is somewhere like the KKK saying you can be part of a brotherhood and we'll have your back. I think that's what a lot of it is. And it's like, if we can just create a more powerful sense of love and community elsewhere, and, try to educate people so they're not ignorant, afraid of one another, and get them to talk to one another. And I don't mean educate in a condescending way. I mean like actual have experience, not just telling people things. Then I think that would alleviate a lot of it if we can just get people in rooms together that have different experiences and get them to talk. Like, I know that's so bridgy and probably sounds very naive of me, but I guess I don't see a lot of evidence for real, genuine hatred. I see fear mostly. Yeah.
What do you think the media's role? What role do you think the media's played in Trump's popularity over the last 8 years?
I mean, they definitely noticed that he gets clicks because he's bombastic and entertaining, and he says shocking things because he's a showman. And he started getting clicks, and so they started writing more and more stories about him. Anything that he says, some of it is like joking, is sarcastic, but they'll take it completely seriously. because it gets him more clicks. It gets them more clicks to take him seriously and act like Trump actually said he was going to weaponize this system or do this insane thing. So I think that also makes him a lot more popular, because then people don't trust the media because they go and check out what he actually said and they see how he's being misrepresented. The quintessential example is when he made this comment about it's going to be a bloodbath, and all the liberal media took it out of context and said he thinks this election is going to be a bloodbath when he was talking about the auto industry. And pretty immediately, everyone on social media was like, no, look at this in context. He said he was clearly talking about the auto industry, and these journalists aren't doing their due diligence. And guess what? He just blew up in popularity because of that, because he has this persecution complex of everyone's out to get me. And I always say that wasn't true until the liberal media made it true. It was seriously not everyone's out to get him and he's being politically attacked so much. And then it did start to feel like people were out to get him because they're like, oh, things about Trump get clicks, but we don't want to pretend like we're validating that or platforming that. So we have to make clear that he's in the wrong. And as soon as you start writing articles saying this person's wrong and evil all the time, it's just, people don't want to be told what to think. So of course they're naturally going to be graded by that, and it's going to make him more popular in the end. And it makes what he says more truthful. Everything has a kernel of truth in it, and that kernel gets bigger and bigger when you make it bigger.
Mm-hmm. And I saw a video of him on somebody's Instagram story this morning where he was asking Christians to come. First of all, Trump saying, I'm a Christian, is my new favorite thing that he's ever said. It's my new favorite thing he said. But he said, Christians come out to vote, and he said, once I win, I'll fix it, and then you'll never have to. He was like, I'll fix it, it'll be fixed, and then you'll never have to vote again. Something like that.
Yeah.
And the people that I saw post this were pointing at that as evidence that he's going to be a dictator, that he's never going to leave. Do you buy into that at all?
Again, he's just saying something bombastic because that's who he is, and he knows it's going to make headlines. It just proven by the fact that everyone reposted that video and everyone wrote articles about it. So he's getting more in the news, and it's getting him more popularity, whether or not he's going to do it. No one actually believes. Well, okay, I shouldn't say no one, but it's highly unlikely that anyone believes, oh, I'm a Christian and I'm going to vote for this guy because once I vote for him, he's going to fix everything and I'm never going to have to vote again. That's unreasonable, and I don't think anyone really takes that seriously. But of course, people are going to use it to say, he's a dictator, we should write about this. But he did not say he was going to be a dictator. And so why put words in his mouth? He said he would be a
dictator for one day.
Yeah, he said day one
or
dictator.
whatever, day one.
But to me, it's so obvious. Oh, Christians, you're never going to have to vote again. It's so obvious that that's a joke. He's exaggerating his point because that's what he does. That's in his character. And so I'm like, why are you taking this guy seriously with every word that he says? And every time he says something shocking, you act shocked like it's the first time he said something like this. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, why play into it? You're playing the exact game that he wants you to play. Mm-hmm. And it feels like it's only making the whole environment worse because it instills more fear in the people that don't like him, being like, oh my God, he really is, might be a dictator. Look at all these anti-democratic things he's saying. And then, of course, the right sees everything taken out of context. Oh my God, they're taking it seriously. They're so stupid. Mm-hmm. And it makes them dig their heels in more. And so it just makes both sides more passionate and afraid and polarized. And I just don't get why no one's learned this yet. It seems so obvious to me that he's a showman. He puts on a show. Don't take everything he says word for word. And yet people keep doing it. And I guess it makes them money. It makes them money off the fear and the anger. But I don't know how they can stomach doing that every day.
And as I am a believer in taking things in a charitable interpretation, again, people aren't going to like that. I don't care. Isn't it possible that what he's speaking to, and he's saying something he's not directly saying it, but couldn't he also be saying, hey, you're afraid right now because things seem so uncertain and there is so much distrust in our electoral system, that if I win, I will quite literally clean it up. And then when he says you'll never have to vote again, he doesn't literally mean you'll never have to vote again, but maybe he's saying you'll never feel like you have to vote again in order to save everything you love about this country.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's entirely possible. Like, when I first heard that, I didn't take it to mean he was going to be a dictator. I took it to mean, I'm going to do the things that you want, and then things are going to, kind of like you just said, and then things are going to be fixed, and you won't have to vote for the next person again because everything will be just the way you like it. And of course, that's also like just not true and a silly claim, but politicians do that all the time, saying, I care about you. I'm going to put in the policies you want. And considering a lot of his voter base is like evangelical Christians on the right, he's going to say, yeah, Christians, I'm going to make this country your home. Like that's how I take what he meant by that statement as well, which is a more charitable interpretation than he's going to be a dictator.
And he said, Christians, come out to vote. He said, I love Christians. I'm a Christian. My favorite kind of businessman is the one that goes, I love business people. I am a businessman. It's my favorite. It's like, okay. So that'll get clipped out of context, and we will both get accused of being Trumpy right-wingers.
Sure.
Can't wait. What do you think about Project 2025?
I think it was made by a conservative think tank, and they put out conservative ideas. It's no real surprise that conservatives aren't super happy with how the country looks right now. And if you're a hardcore conservative, you're going to want something that looks very different than what we have today. And that's what the Heritage Foundation did. They put out a picture of what hardcore conservatives want the country to look like. And I think it stirred a lot of people up with fear. A lot of people on the left are very afraid of it. And I'm like, not all of this is in the plan is going to happen. The Heritage Foundation did have a big sway over some Republican administrations of the past, but now they have a lot less sway. And like a lot of what's in there is just, some of it is reasonable and some of it is completely never going to happen in this country. And so I don't see any like why people are getting so worked up about it, because some of it is just never going to happen. And Trump has also said, this is not my plan. This is not my agenda. This is not what I'm going to do. And people are saying, oh, well, some of your employees helped write it. And it's like, yeah, they don't speak for Trump.
Yeah, that also doesn't mean anything, because that doesn't mean that he's going to bring them back. Because this is also the guy that throws anyone into the garbage can that says anything bad about him. So who's to say that any of these people that are working on Project 2025, do we know if those people are still in good graces with him or not? That would be my next question.
Yeah.
Because if they are, then yes, maybe it is possible they get brought back on. But also, if they criticize him at any point in the past, he has a very, I think, pretty damn clean track record of being done with those people forever.
Yeah.
He just throws you in the garbage.
If they directly contradict him and say, you know, you're going to implement all of 2025, he'll just fire them. And even if he does rehire them, even if he hires them in his administration and they worked on Project 2025, that doesn't mean Project 2025 is going to happen. Because like I said, some of it is just completely impractical and they don't have the power to just do with an executive action. We have checks and balances in this country, right? So I don't think it's really anything to be afraid of. Like I said, some of it's reasonable, some of it's ludicrous, but the ludicrous things are, it's not reasonable to expect them to happen. It's just a conservative view of what they would like to see happen. And so liberals seem very scared of it, and I don't really understand why, because I'm like, the Heritage Foundation are not people that we have elected. It's a think tank that put out a blueprint that like no one has to use. It's just something that's out there.
And I guess this may be some pushback. What about the part, and again, I wish I had a direct quote, because I don't want to take it out of context. But it says something along the lines of like American democracy will like re-usher in an era of like American democracy unless the left does some shit and like steals the election again. That's basically kind of like what they said, which is like, that's not great.
I mean, it's, again, the hardcore conservative vision of America is that the last election wasn't secure. And again, in the least charitable way possible, you can be like, oh, that means it's going to be a dictatorship because they're never going to let the left win again. But in the most charitable interpretation, It could be, we had concerns about rules changing very fast during 2020 due to COVID that we felt made mail-in ballots and other methods of voting slightly less secure, and we would like to implement things like voter ID to ensure that voting is very secure. And that's something I'm like, voter ID seems reasonable to me. That's like a more charitable interpretation. Now, there are things like Republicans and judicial systems giving more power to partisan people that are elected to rule whether an election should be thrown out or not. And I do understand concerns with that. But again, it depends on your interpretation. And I also just think about what's practical. Again, okay, a random think tank, okay, a influential think tank said this. Like, that doesn't mean anything to me unless it's in danger of happening, unless a bill's been introduced, or we elected someone who said, I will implement this plan. That's a little bit more concerning, even if they may not have the power to. But guess what? There is no one running for office that said, I'm going to implement Project 2025. So why are we all worked up about it?
Can you make the argument for and against Kamala Harris being a diversity hire in quotation marks?
Okay. Well, the argument for is that Joe Biden said he would pick a woman vice president and preferably a woman of color, which effectively means he did hire someone for reasons of diversity. That is the most straightforward, I think, argument. And there's another argument that a lot of the jobs that she happened to get, she didn't really have competition to get them. And that when she did finally have competition, when she ran for president in 2020, she severely crashed and burned and ran out of money during her 2020 campaign. Yet Joe Biden still picked her to be his VP. And he said he wanted a woman, preferably a woman of color. And he picked one who didn't do well, wasn't viewed favorably, nor had the money to run a competent 2020 campaign.
And that's among her own party.
Yes. The argument against that would be that this comes from a New York Times opinion piece that I found was actually really interesting. It said, if Kamala Harris is a diversity hire, so is J.D. Vance, and that essentially all politics are to some degree identity politics, and that J.D. Vance was picked because he's from the working class. He's from, white, poor Appalachia, which he did not choose those identities any more than Kamala Harris chose hers. Mm-hmm. And so, Trump appeals to the working class, so he picked someone who also appealed to the working class. So it's like,
that's a smart political move to also pick someone that kind of appeals to the same. Like, isn't there an argument that he should have picked someone that appeals to a slightly different voter base?
Well, there's the fact that like J.D. Vance actually grew up working class and Trump had everything handed to him, even though
That's a good point.
Yeah. But yes, there is something to say that he should have picked someone more moderate that appeals to a more like college educated, I don't want to vote for Trump, but I'm a Republican type people. He really picked someone who was doubling down on the MAGA rather than appealing to people more moderate or in the middle in any way. So I think you could make that argument. But yeah, so as for Kamala Harris as a DEI hire, some people are like, well, he straight up said she was a DEI hire. And then the right has also said like, oh, why is the left saying that saying someone's a DEI hire is a slur? The left says, oh, that's like diminishing her accomplishments. That's saying she's unqualified and just got it because of her race and gender. But then the left is like, or the right is saying to the left, I thought you liked DEI. You wanted DEI. So why would calling her a DEI hire be offensive to you? Because that's what you wanted. So there's kind of an argument there. Originally, without having read anything about it, I was like, yeah, she's a DEI hire. Joe Biden said it. But then I read that New York Times piece that I thought made a better argument. There are some pieces on the left that are just like, oh, DEI hire is a slur. And I was like, okay, whatever. But I thought it was interesting to say that all politics is identity politics. It just depends which identities you care about. And for the left, yeah, it's things like race and gender. And for the right, it's, what class are you at this point in time in where the Republican and Democrat parties are at. But it's also like, again, J.D. Vance didn't choose to be white. He didn't choose to be born where he was. So it's like everyone is kind of playing the same game. It just depends how you spin it. And I'm kind of compelled by that as well. I think that's one of the strongest points for her, like, not being a DI hire is like, well, everyone is. It just depends what types of diversity you care about. And all of them are important to some degree. It's just, it depends which ones you prioritize based on what your viewpoint is.
At the risk of asking an obvious question, do you think she'll get the nomination?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much locked in at this point. She has the delegates to do so, and she has support of pretty much every major Democrat in office. She's the former President Obama's endorsement.
Yep.
Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, like everyone that matters, she's gotten their endorsement by this point, and she has the delegates.
And a lot of money.
Actually, I believe if anyone is running against her, they were supposed to declare by Saturday, which is today. So, so if no one else has declared, then she does have the nomination.
And who do you think her vice president? Well, I guess this is two questions. Who do you think her vice president pick will be, if you have any guesses as to that? And who would you like her vice president pick to be?
I'll answer first who I would like it to be.
Okay.
I think there are several good options. I think out of the options that are kind of on the table according to the media, I think Josh Shapiro would be a good choice.
Agreed.
This is not on the list, but I also think John Fetterman would be a fine choice. She really needs to lock in Pennsylvania. It's one of the big swing states. And I also think picking a more moderate candidate would be good. And even if they're like pro-Israel, which the left was protesting, saying they weren't going to vote for Biden because of the Gaza-Israel issue. But a lot of them I've seen are saying, like, okay, you kind of have to suck it up. Like, yes, we don't want to vote for someone who's funding genocide, but we also don't want to vote for Donald Trump. So you just have to vote for the lesser of two evils. So I think at the end of the day, Democrats will fall in line behind her no matter what. But I think if you want to appeal to those moderates, then she comes off as more progressive. And so she should pick someone a little more moderate. Everyone's talking about how she should pick a white man, which I do agree with because that is a big portion of the country, and I think we can't force change. So if you were to pick like another person of color or another woman, I would like to get to a point where that's a fine choice to make. But I also think if you're claiming to represent everybody, there are a lot of white men in this country. It's helpful to make them feel represented, especially at such a point in time where diversity, equity, inclusion is such a huge topic of debate and contention. And if we keep talking, we talked in the beginning of this about the nihilism of young men. Okay, not that, the last 40-some presidents have all been male. Not that we need to, like, give a male president to make sure they feel represented. But at the same time, like, men are falling behind right now. And if we're going to give them consideration, I don't think it helps to be like, yeah, we're going to get super progressive and make sure everyone but you is represented. If they're the ones that are committing violence, right? So I do think she should probably pick a white man. I think anyone from Pennsylvania would be a good option, super moderate. Arizona, Governor Mark Kelly has also been on the table. I'm not super familiar with what he's done, but I do think being a border state that has to deal with immigration a lot would be a good pick because one of the major points against her is that she was put in charge of the border early in the administration and didn't fix the problem. People don't like that. So to have someone who has direct experience of being in a border state, I think that would be good. I also don't know much about the governor of Illinois that's been thrown out there a lot. The governor of South Carolina, I don't know much about him, but he's also been thrown out there. So I think any of those would be decent picks. I think going to Pennsylvania would be cool. Who will she pick? Well, for one, Newsom has been thrown out there somewhat. She can't pick him. One, I don't think he would even accept it if she could pick him. But there's an amendment that you cannot pick a vice president from the same state as the president. So that's the same reason why Trump couldn't go with Marco Rubio from Florida, because Trump's from Florida. Mm-hmm. Kamala Harris is from California, so she couldn't pick Gavin Newsom even if she wanted to.
Gotcha. That would be you'd just be rolling out the red carpet for Trump.
Yeah. I don't think she should pick Whitmer either, and I don't think she will pick Whitmer. But I have heard a decent argument for Whitmer. It kind of changed my mind a little bit of like, oh, it actually could be a really good ticket to like take a gamble of having two women in office, because it might like rather than reaching out to the moderates, it might actually encourage, again, more people to vote for that. And then you have a historic moment of 2 women in office if you do win, that kind of thing. I think there is an argument you could make for her, but I don't think she's going to pick Whitmer. I guess if I had to guess, my money right now would be on Mark Kelly from Arizona, but I'm not very confident in that. I wouldn't actually put money down on that. That's what I'll say, but that would be my guess.
I would like to see Josh Shapiro because I want to see him run for president in 2028.
That would be cool. Yeah.
I kind of like him. Do you think hard pivot? Do you think that, what do you think the benefits are of being a little bit emotionally disconnected? Because you've said, at least in conversations we've had, you've kind of talked about how you've become a little bit emotionally disconnected from the news because it quite literally is your 9-to-5 job.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the benefits are like you can get more done, to be honest. Like if you just don't feel it and you just get to work and do your job, then you don't have to pause. It feels more efficient and less, it's exhausting to be emotional sometimes. And I think that's okay to be exhausted. And I think you should allow yourself that. But also, there are certain situations in which it feels like you can't. When there's an assassination on an attempt on a former president and it is your job to deliver people the news and they trust you, you don't have time to process your emotional response. You have to do your obligation as a reporter. And I've kind of heard similar things from people that like are doctors and work in like emergency rooms and they lose someone and it's like they know they need to process it, but they have this ability to just kind of lock it away until they have time to go home and process it because they have a job to do, and that is to save the next person. And I feel like I'm definitely not on that scale, like saving lives or anything, but I think there are certain jobs where like you have to be able to have that capacity to kind of compartmentalize and say, I need to deal with this emotionally. I should. Otherwise, it's going to come out in ways that are unhelpful. However, I need to deal with it at a different time. And right now, I need to, focus on this. And I think it's also, there are certain things you definitely need to process. Like if you're in a hospital and you lose a patient, that's something that's very close and emotional and you do need to process. But I think sometimes with the news, I can just fully disconnect because there's no use in getting super emotional, and sometimes you can't control it, but over things that you really can't control. And at this point, people keep asking me about election stuff, which is fine, but I'm like, I'm going to go to the voting booth in November. I'm going to vote, and that's all I can do. Mm-hmm. So and then I'm going to watch the results come in, and what's going to happen is going to happen. Like I just cannot expel all of my energy and all my emotions getting twisted up about Project 2025 that isn't going to happen, It's like I have to do what I have control over, and I feel very in control when I'm like, some shit just hit the fan. What I can do right now is deliver people information. What I can do right now is my job, and that's, the most useful person I can be in this moment. And so I think that's what's useful, is not disconnecting for the sake of disconnecting, because that's going to hurt in the long run. But if you're like, this is the way that I can serve people in this moment, and if I need to process, I will make time to process, at a later date, then I think like that's probably the healthiest way to do it. But it's a very tricky line to walk between I need to put this aside for now and process it later, and just completely like disconnecting, never processing anything, and like shutting your emotions off entirely, which obviously will come back to get you. But.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about how you found Buddhism?
Yeah.
As someone who was a confirmed atheist for the first 2 or 3 of your appearances on this show.
Well, I still am an atheist. You can be Buddhist and atheist.
Okay, then I stand corrected.
Yeah, so Buddhism, there isn't a god. There is the Buddha who has certain teachings that people follow, and it is classified as a religion by a lot of people, but also like just a philosophy. it kind of depends what strain you're in. The religion part is there's like some things about mysticism and things about what happens after you die, reincarnation, those kind of beliefs. But you can also treat it as just a philosophy, and you can be a Buddhist Christian or a Buddhist atheist, those type things, if you're just looking at philosophy. But that's a side note. How did I find it? I kind of heard about meditation, figured it's something healthy in the way that like exercising is healthy, but like not everyone wants to do it. And so it's something that like I tried once or twice without success, but didn't really care too much about it. But I had the opportunity to take a college course on meditation and the practice of it. And I was like, I'm going to seriously try this. It seems like it'd be useful. So I took the class, and part of it was to meditate consistently and write reflections on it. So I did that. We learned about many different types of meditations, not just in the Buddhist tradition, but all types of traditions, including the Christian tradition. But that was kind of the one that I first latched onto to try, was one called Vipassana meditation in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. And something that I like about Buddhism is Christianity is very like preachy and can sometimes be like a threat. Like, you're not a good person if you don't believe it. You're going to hell if you don't believe it. You need to believe this to be saved. Buddhists, they don't preach. People come to them. And the mentality is very much, it's always very scientific. It's always test it. Try it and see if this works for you. And if it doesn't, move on. Like, there's no obligation or pressure. And for me, coming from a very intellectualized point of view, I needed to know the neuroscience. I needed to know the history, the context. Why would this work? And so it was really helpful for me to take that college class. And I learned the history and kind of what meditation was rooted in. I wasn't just like, I'm going to try and sit here and do nothing. I learned the history of it, and I read a bunch about the neuroscience. I've read like probably over 10 books about Buddhism at this point. So I had to kind of convince myself, maybe this will work. Look at all the science. But then the most important thing is to actually practice it. And so I did practice meditation, and it did work for me. I guess to get a bit personal, I've suffered with chronic panic attacks my entire life. Never found anything that helped. And meditation helped. It was the only thing that's ever worked for me, and it had a massive effect. And so that was something, and it also snapped me out of my intellectualism. I've always been a very mind-heavy intellectual person. And when you have to sit there in your body and not think for a minute, which I don't think I've ever really done, but to just focus on the breath and how I feel in my body, and when emotions do come up, when there's either emotional or physical pain, to be like, what does that feel like? Where is that in my body? I think really connected me to feeling like I am one organism. It's not just like I'm a mind trapped in a flesh prison like a lot of the philosophers say. It kind of, I stopped fighting myself. Mm-hmm. And that, it really like things clicked. It started healing things for me. And so like I'm still reading a lot about Buddhism, very interested in it, because like I said, it was an invitation. It wasn't a threat that you're going to go to hell. It was like, try this. You know, it's endured for so many years. Maybe there's something to this. And I was so skeptical, but I read so much science and I tried it. And the biggest thing is, rather than intellectualizing, to just try it for several weeks. And I was like, it's working. What more can I ask for? So that's definitely like driven a lot of my further interest in it. And the more that I learn, the more that things just start to make sense for me. And I don't want to like, again, there's no instinct to go preach to people and make them believe it, because it might not work for them. But there is an instinct to share my experience, because I know as soon as I encountered it, I was like, where's this been for the last 20 years? I could have, like, I'm happy with where I am, but I was also like, I could have avoided so much pain if I had had this earlier. And so there's a part of me that wants to like give it to anyone in pain, be like, I've discovered this gift, like, let me gift it to you as well. But also like, it might not work for everybody, and that's fine as well. But it's something that I'm starting to hold very close to my heart, because it so quickly changed so much about how I saw and experienced the world. in a way that was just like so needed.
Mm-hmm. What does truth mean to you? Like, what does that word mean?
Yeah. Well, that's one of those things that shifted when I got more into Buddhism, because I used to be very, truth was something objective, even though I wasn't sure I could like make a philosophical case for objective versus subjective reality. It was like, there is a truth somewhere out there that we want to find, and it's useful to believe as if there is an objective truth. And I think I still kind of hold to that. Like, it is useful to imagine there is an objective truth that we can find just for navigating the day-to-day news, misinformation, that kind of thing. It's useful to be like, there are a set of facts that I can find. Mm-hmm. But in this more existential dimension, I used to hold so tightly to like, what is the truth, looking in the science, trying to find, what is true? Is it materialism? Is it some religion? And now that I've moved to a place where I'm not entirely relying on my intellect, it's like, what does it matter if I'm believing something false if it's made my quality of life so much better? Mm-hmm. And which I used to be like, oh my God, like if you asked me 2 years ago, I would have never admitted something like that. I would have been like, oh, even if I'm believing something wrong or painful, it is always better to see the truth and be clear. And now I'm like, I don't know that anyone's ever going to find this thing that we're calling truth. Do we even really know what it is? Like, we have this big idea that we're searching for something called truth and that we're going to know when we find it and something like that. And I guess I'm just less tied to it. I'm like, there's this thing out there that we keep chasing, but I don't know if it exists out there. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if it's something we can actually find. And so instead of being on this wheel where I'm constantly chasing something, I just stopped for a minute and looked internally. And I was like, maybe that's all I need. Maybe I don't need to look outside for all of this like very existential, truthy thing that I may or may not know when I find it. Like, why don't I just sit and exist? And that, I think, was much better for me in an existential sense. Obviously, in like a news cycle, day-to-day sense, it's useful to like not believe false things in terms of, especially like how to take care of yourself. If you think like, I don't know, only eating junk food is truth and good for you, obviously it's not. Like stupid examples like that where like it's useful to have something that we can call facts and to believe that those facts are true because it will make our quality of life better. But in instances where we don't know what the facts are, or it seems fairly well supported, though it might change, I'm like, don't like crush yourself and pull yourself in every direction trying to find the truth. Just like do the best you can is like where and I guess, I don't know, that might sound silly and simple, but a lot of the stupid, simple things are true. Like, the older I get, the more I'm realizing every stupid little cliche that I hate is, like, pretty true, and there's a reason it's a cliche. So it's just one of those things where I'm like, don't kill yourself trying to find something when, like, you don't even really know what you're trying to find. Just do the best you can to believe what you assess to be true, but you don't need to, I guess, kill yourself looking. Like, you just need to take what's there and experience it, and that's good enough.
So at the beginning of the show, you were clipped for being a MAGA Republican.
Yeah.
And now you've been clipped for being a postmodernist, anarcho-communist who doesn't think that objective truth exists. So it's good. We get both.
Yeah.
You get both. I like
Great.
that. What's one thing that is fundamentally different about you from 1 year ago?
I feel like the biggest thing, at least that I've been writing about and thinking about lately, is that, like, just stopping fighting myself all the time. Yeah. I don't think it was particularly bad a year ago, but I feel like it's a habit I've built my entire life of just, like, things can be inconvenient. It's like, oh my God, I'm having an emotion that's so inconvenient, or like I'm having a panic attack. I just need to hide it because that's the only way you push through something. And, you know, that's how I survived for a while. I can understand why that happened. But now it's like fighting the things that I experience and how I feel is no longer, that's not going to get me to the place I want to be, which is like a happy, fulfilled person. That's something that I did because I had to survive as a kid and get through the day to day. But I think just letting myself, you know, acknowledging the way I feel in a moment and allowing that to be there, like just locating what I'm feeling, where I'm feeling it, and just saying it's okay. Like that's fine. It's neither good or bad. Even emotions we quote unquote say bad, like sadness or anger or something, it's like, well, what I'm feeling actually is just like a tightness in my chest. And, you know, maybe I have tears that might indicate that I'm sad, but it's not a bad thing. It's a reaction to something that I'm going through. And so I think not fighting that has been like the biggest thing for me.
What's one thing you're afraid that people will get wrong about you?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I think given everything that I've just said, I think it's that, I almost want to say I think it's that I've changed because, like, I don't know, people that grew up with me and stuff might be like, oh, you're getting into this, like, hippy-dippy, like, not the person that you once were, which is true in some sense. I mean, not the hippy-dippy part, but, like, I am not the person that I once was. I think I'm better. Not to flex. I'm better than myself, better than I used to be. But, and then other people might see me and be like, oh, like, I don't know, might identify more with where I am now, or like farther out, I guess, than I am now, and not see the person that I've been to get here and how hard it was and how that still shapes my views. Like, I think it's hard when I feel like I'm in this transitional period, both in life, just like graduating college, and like an emotionally transitional period. It's hard to understand both where I've been, where I'm at, and where I'm going. And I feel like people will only see either where I've been or where I'm at, I guess, is the concern, and not be able to take all of it into account, which is understandable because, I mean, it's hard to fully understand a person and everything they've been through, and you've only, I mean, even if you've known them for 10 years, you don't fully understand everything that they've been through, which is fine. I don't think everyone needs to. But I think, I guess my concern is always that people will cherry pick either a conservative view I have, or a liberal view that I have, or a view towards religion that I have, or a view towards science that I have, or whatever, and not take it in the full context of who I am, what I've been through, where I'm going, all that stuff. But can't really stop that. I'm also trying to let go of people misinterpreting me. I mean, it just, you have to be willing to be misunderstood if you're going to share what you really think.
Well, we talk every day, and I will say you are a much different person than you were when I first met you. And at the same time, you are the most you that you've ever been.
Thanks. That's sweet.
Thank you, Clare Ashcraft. We got to wrap up because we're going to go bowling and we're going to have fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, everybody.